You're probably wondering how the DJI Avata compares to the DJI FPV right here. Well, in this video, we're going to provide you with the data, and then you can come up with your own conclusion. So let's get to it. Let's get started with some specs. The DJI Avata weighs in at 405 grams as opposed to almost double for the DJI FPV at 795 grams. Both of these are using the O3 technology, although the Avata is using O3 Plus, which is a slightly newer technology. 60 miles an hour maximum speed for the Avata, 87 miles an hour for the DJI FPV. And then as far as sensors, this has sensors at the bottom right here. The DJI FPV is a little bit more advanced. It actually has front sensors as well as bottom sensors, so that might save you bacon when you get close to an object. Now, as far as the battery is concerned, we did the testing on the same day, so the density altitude was the same at 8,253 feet. We started at 99% with this. The battery is fairly new on here. This has slightly older batteries. We were able to only get 95% out of them, but all the way down to forced landing, which was actually at 8%. We were a bit surprised with this drone. It forced landed at 8%. This one forced landed at 0%. We get 14 minutes and 3 seconds out of the Avata. We get 13 minutes and 16 seconds out of the DJI FPV. Now, you may be wondering, how does this compare to the advertised flight time? The advertised flight time is 19 minutes on the DJI Avata, which is, we reach 74% of that. And then on the DJI FPV, it's 20 minutes. So it's advertised a little bit more, but we get a little bit less time. So we only get 66% of the battery life in this case here. I don't really quite know the difference between the two and why we get such a difference. 66% is actually not really a great score. We see that most of our drones are typically in the mid-70s, even other DJI drones that we've tested. Again, this is all tested at the same altitude pretty much every time, so it gives us a good base. And yes, we're testing them in hovering, and yes, they were advertised as hovering time. Your mileage is going to change widely, depending on how fast you fly this drone. If you fly it in sports mode or normal mode, there's going to be a big difference. Now, we also tested the noise on this. This drone is pretty noisy. It's actually a very high pitch. We tested it at 81 decibel, which is a really high number if you think about it. This was quite a bit lower at 75 decibels. We tested it going over the hill. I'll show you some footage in a minute. And I could not hear the DJI FPV. We could still see it, but I couldn't hear it. This, we heard it the entire time. So if anything, this will help with line of sight in a sense, because you can actually see it or hear it a little bit better in the distance. I know the two don't correlate very much, but this is a noisy little guy right here. As far as the cameras, this has a 1/1.7 inch CMOS sensor. This is a slightly smaller sensor at 1/2.3 inches. We'll give you some data in a second of the comparative footage. I think they're really close to each other. This has a 48 megapixel camera. This has a 12 megapixel. Now, this is a quad Bayer sensor, so I would take that with a grain of salt. It's 4 times more pixels, but those pixels are a lot smaller on a DJI Avata. Field of view, very close, 155 degrees as opposed to 150 degrees, which gives us an equivalent of 12.6 millimeters as opposed to 14.6 millimeters. This is the focal length in 35 millimeter equivalent. As far as videos, very close to each other, 4K 60 on both sides, 1080 at 100 or 120 frames per second. You're going to say, which one is it? Well, according to the manual, this is actually dependent on the goggles that you're using, which I can't really wrap my head around. But this, we were able to get 100 frame per second footage. We were not able to get 120 frame per second footage because we have not been able to connect the old goggles, which on paper would give you that level. On this drone, 120 frames per second, we were able to get that all day long. Color modes, same on both sides, normal and D-Cine-like. There's not a whole lot of difference in the color profile. Again, I'll show you some footage in a second so you can get your own idea. Both drones have image stabilization. This has rock steady, but also horizon mode. The DJI FPV only has rock steady. We weren't really able to get a big difference in results. It's hard to show you really the difference between the two in rock steady, but there was not a massive difference. If you've seen our full review, we compared it to the GoPro Hero 10. There was quite a bit of a difference. And then it really depends on how you like your footage stabilized. The rock steady does a great great job at keeping the roll out of the picture. We found that the GoPro was not able to do as good of a job. This only has one kind of view if you want. You can only do the wide angle view. This has the ability to remove some of the distortion, although you do have the ability to do some distortion removal, but this has a normal view which removes pretty much every bit of distortion, which we thought was really cool. And then it has a wide and ultra wide. This is a little bit simpler in a sense on the DJI FPV side. And then as far as the pricing, a bit of a difference here, and also a difference in what is offered. So the DJI Avata can be purchased as only the drone. This is something new that DJI started doing with the last release, their Mini 3 Pro, where you can buy the drone only. So if you already own one of these drones here, you already own a controller like this, possibly even one of these right here, which is the motion controller, and then you already own the goggles, then by all means, you can spend $629 to buy just the drone, which I think is it's a cool option. We have so many controllers in our office. I would love the ability to buy just the drone and then use whatever controller we have laying around. Now, if you buy this with the old goggles, I'm going to call them the V2 goggles, it's going to be $1,168. If you buy it with the new goggles, these are the new goggles here that are a little bit lighter, it's going to be $1,388. Now, the DJI FPV at the moment is priced at pretty much $1,000, which comes with the goggles and the controller. This is the traditional controller right here. I have to mention that the Avata at the moment only comes with this as a part of the bundle. So if you wanted to buy the additional controller here, the transmitter, the FPV transmitter, it's going to cost you an extra $179. So now you're getting a little bit over $1,500. You can also just buy one of the items if you want, one by one. We have not seen the ability to buy just the goggles, the new goggles at the moment. So it sounds like either if you want to fly in manual mode, you're going to have to buy this separately in addition to buying this. If you don't want to use this at the moment, you kind of forced to do it unless you want to buy just the drone. I hope this makes sense. It's very complicated and confusing, but I think it also brings a lot of freedom for you, the consumer, to buy this whichever way you want in a way. So there's a Fly More combo. It's $279 on the Avata side. It's $300. I think the batteries are a bit more expensive on the FPV side. And then you can buy the motion controller only if you wanted to do that for $200. So I hope I didn't confuse you too much with all these numbers, but that's kind of where we are here. Now, we also tested the thrust for this drone. How much can this thing lift? And I know we did that last time for previous reviews, and people are asking us questions. Why do you do the testing as to how much it can lift? And the reason we do this is because these drones have been used, especially the DJI FPV, to carry a GoPro on top of it. We were able to put a GoPro on top of this one. It was the Hero 10 Bones, which is the lighter version. We put a small little battery on top of the regular battery to power it up. It flew okay. It was definitely heavier. You could tell on takeoff you needed a lot more gas to get started. But what we found is that this little drone right here can have a thrust of 980 grams in addition to lifting its own weight. So that brings the thrust ratio to 3.38 to 1, which is a good ratio. This has a slightly better ratio, 3.54 to 1, but still it's pretty impressive from this little drone. Obviously it's smaller, it weighs less, the motors are not as strong, but in relationship to its own weight, it actually does a lot of good work. This has the ability to lift a full GoPro with the battery in the inside, not the Bones version, but if you have just a traditional GoPro, and then also a filter in front of it, an ND filter. So we tested all of that at 8,200 feet of density altitude. So keep that in mind. This is a pretty high altitude. If you live at sea level, you probably would get much better performance than we did. I want to give you kind of the pros and cons after using this thing for a while now, for a couple weeks. There are things that we like, there are things that we're not a big fan of, and then kind of comparing it also to the DJI FPV. Now, the great thing with this little drone right here is you can get into tighter spaces, especially indoors. Obviously, you would not want to do this with the DJI FPV. It's just too bulky and just wouldn't fit in here. I mean, the footprint is amazing. And the fact that you have these ducts already right on here is really cool. This is also much more maneuverable just because it's a much lighter weight. I hate to say this, but this is a bit of a porker here. This drone compared to other FPV drones, definitely not as nimble, okay? We love the touch here on the goggles of the adjustable diopters. I think this was a great thing. If you have goggles, if you have glasses, you're going to really appreciate the fact that you can adjust everything right here. Also, the fact that these goggles are much lighter, I think is really cool. The ability to do head tracking, you can move your left to the right and to the left, and this will allow the drone to turn left or right to see that happening. Go to the full review that we did or to the deep dive that we have available for free on our website, and you'll be able to see how this all works. And then the fact that this has replacement parts available. You can buy replacement parts and change like the main frame. There's not a whole lot of components to this, quite frankly, but everything is cheap actually. 15, 20 bucks to get a new part, new propellers that you can also buy and change. So that's a good plus compared to this drone here, which was not really great for that portion. Now, like I said, the DJI FPV has its own plus. It can carry a GoPro without too much trouble. The signal penetration was actually really impressive, better on these old goggles than it is on the new goggles. Now, this is more of a comparison of old goggles versus new goggles, but we were able to go through so many walls to get that signal and still be able to see what's going on with the drone. So that was really cool. Another cool thing, here you can easily swap your propellers if you wanted to. And of course, as I'm saying that, there you go. It's easy to get this out, change it, and put it back on. It's going to be a little bit more painful here because you have two little screws. Now, it's not the end of the world. That's what I call a first world problem. But changing the props is a lot quicker. Without a tool, you can do it on the DJI FPV. And then obviously the fact that it has forward sensors here. If you're someone who relies on vision sensors, that's really going to help you. Non-existent on this drone, just trying to save quite a bit of weight, I'm sure, and also on the price side. Downside, I did not like how loud this thing was. It's really loud, especially if you're going to fly indoors. People will notice. We were flying around, and yeah, it's definitely noticeable, even from a distance. So if you want to be kind of stealth, this is not the drone to be stealth. It's not as good in the wind. There's a lot of surface here to create a lot of drag, so it's not going to be, it's going to get pushed around if it gets windy. But to be fair, this is more of an indoor drone, right? This is a Cine Whoop, but this is not a drone you're going to take miles away and then come back because you're going to run out of batteries. The location of the USB card, I did not like that at all. I'm still not a fan after having used it so many times. I couldn't even find it right now. It's down in here inside of the duct. Well, I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but I'm going to leave them to do that on version 2 or the next model. And then it overheated quite a bit when we were doing testing. Now, to be fair, we put it on the stand to do, well, to check the settings, to do a lot of things. So it sat there for a while. It sat outside as we were changing some of the settings and then overheated quite a few times. So just something to be aware of. This has a fan on its own, so it's not going to overheat. We also had a bit of a difficulty, and I don't know if this is something that's going to be widespread or if it's just because we got the drone early, but we had quite a bit of issues with the connection between this and this, and we had to rebind every single time, and that just it became a bit of a pain at the end. And then obviously the fact that this doesn't come with this transmitter means that you have to buy this transmitter if you want to fly in full manual mode. So it's a bit of a downside. I wish there was a package that doesn't include this, but instead includes this. So last thing, something I don't like about the DJI FPV is that it's just not designed to fly indoors. I don't know if it's a big dislike, but it's not the tool, it's not the right tool to fly indoors. And then it has a slightly smaller sensor. Speaking of which, I want to show you some of the videos. Now, I'm not going to be making any commentary. This is how we're going to end the video. I'm going to show you a comparison side by side of this. Unfortunately, it's a bit overcast outside, so keep that in mind when you watch this footage. It's a bit overcast. You'll see the settings that we used, but you'll be able to get a side-by-side comparison of the two. We set them up to look mostly the same as far as the angle of view, And as far as the colors, they're set up to be the same. And then the stabilization is also the same. So I'm going to leave you with this. Leave your comments down in here. Watch this video, and then we'll see you at the next one.